What is up, everybody? Gary Simon here. Today is a list of 14 things that I think you should stop doing as a UI designer. Now, of course, I could make a list that's probably a lot bigger, but these are just things that it came to my mind that I could put into a quick video. They're in no particular order, and let's get started. Now, wait, before we get started, though, I need to mention that if you are an aspiring UI designer and you're not very good with UI design, which might be the case if you're aspiring, then you should definitely check out my UI design bootcamp at scrimba.com.
At Scrimba, you don't just watch videos. No. You're actually able to modify code in the browser while you learn. My course on UI design features over 100 lessons that are specifically tailored to help you become an awesome UI designer, and they're packed with interactive challenges.
So if you click on the very top link of the YouTube description here, you're going to get access not to just my UI design bootcamp, but many other courses that are offered by scrimba.com. All right, so these are in no particular order. The very first one, number one, is going to be using low contrast type. Stop doing that. It's probably one of the number one things I talk about often that I see new UI designers get wrong. If you're working in Adobe XD or Figma in this case, there are plugins, Stark Contrast, it's for both of them that you can get it for. And you can see if we select this, the ratio is just way too low. You need to boost these up way more so that people can actually read these. And you want, at least for small text, 4.5 to 1 ratio. So that's going to be one of the number one things. Get your contrast correct for items that need to be, visibly seen and that people need to be able to interact with. So that's text and also icons. All right, number two, centering content in a 2-column layout. This is something I see often. In this case, we have 2 columns here. We have these icons, which are kind of structured in such a way that it defines the right side of this container. And then we have this column over here where everything's kind of just centered. In this context, it makes much more sense. It's going to really help frame the layout better if you left align this content. And for instance, you could center this as long as everything else in the other column was centered as well and also structured the same way. So like an icon here, like a little headline and then like a description, that would work much better. But in this case, because this is really defining the right side of the column, I'm going to push that over there to the left as well. The next one, this is going to sound strange, but I'm going to say being too creative. And this is what I mean. So this particular case is actually kind of cool because this person is an HTML email developer. So they developed or designed a user interface based on like a commonly associated email client. But I see a lot of people for their portfolios, for instance, using desktop layouts, like where they emulate a Mac or a Windows layout, and it kind of just makes it hard to use and navigate. So if it's your portfolio, you really want to try to stick to the conventional ideas. But this one, I'm actually kind of going to give a pass because it is pretty cool. It is really relevant. But if you're one of those people who are using, trying to be creative by using like a desktop and creating a desktop interaction, it's usually hard to use and it's not a good thing, especially for your portfolio. Number 4, using overused illustration libraries, or at least overusing them yourself. There's many of them. There's one called Humans. There's one called Undraw right here. I think most of us, the designers, have seen this library. It's hugely successful. It's designed pretty well. But the problem is if you use it for like your portfolio, for instance, and people like potential employers want to hire you, and you're using like one of these as your hero image or something like that, they're going to probably spot that, and you really want to, as much as possible, try to be creative. So does that mean you have to create your own illustrations from scratch? Not necessarily, but I would really invest in something maybe a little bit more unique, or even hire an illustrator to do something custom for you if you really want to stand out and be unique. Having said that, like if you use some of these for a client or whatever, that's completely fine. I'm not saying you should never use these, but if you really want to be unique, especially for your portfolio, I would not use these really familiar sort of icon libraries or illustration libraries. All right, so number 5, using unnecessary placeholder values. We could see here for this contact form, it says name and then your name, email, your email address, subject, your subject. It's just unnecessary. Just avoid using the placeholder value, even for additional information. There's been research about it that perhaps the placeholder value in some contexts or most contexts isn't even worth using. Just use like a sub-label underneath the label itself if you want to communicate more information. But even in this case, you don't need to, because these are all pretty self-explanatory. Your message is your message, your email is your email. So this also leads me to number 6, and we're going to stay on the same page here, and that is not using clear enough contrast to your form elements. Of course, if we took away these your name little labels right here, a person really wouldn't know where to click in, because the background of the element itself is the same as the background of the page, and there's also only, I guess you would say, only a border on the left and the right, but you really want that border all the way around, or change the background color of the element so that it contrasts enough against the background on which it's sitting. That way people know exactly where to tap with their finger if they're on mobile, or to click on their mouse button. Now, number 7, using subpar thumbnails. So this is something I see often. This person actually just kind of created an entire screenshot of the browser itself with all these tabs open, and it just really clutters everything. You really wanted to create nice polished thumbnails. If you look at Dribbble.com, and actually I'll show you right now. If I go to Dribbble.com and we go to web design, for instance, create thumbnails like this that you can actually integrate. They're nice, cool, and sleek looking. And if you really pay attention and you take the time to create good thumbnails, that obviously will speak well to the client. But just taking screenshots of the UI in a browser context is not really ideal, in my opinion. All right, number 8, using high contrast borders. So here's an example. We have borders all around. We have a border around the hero image. We have borders around these. And these high contrast borders, they simply just add visual clutter. So they make the design unnecessarily busy in this context. So if I get out the dev tools here and I try to change one of these, let me come over here and find this so that we can get rid of the border. Looks so much better when we get rid of that. And so really it's a return to simplicity by getting rid of these high contrast borders here. Next up, number 9, using high contrast drop shadows. So I'm talking about this right here. This is a high contrast drop shadow. Now, if you'd used a drop shadow that was maybe a lot less contrast, very little opacity, you can get away with it. But shadows, generally speaking, they're meant to be like an afterthought. Otherwise, like the high contrast borders, they just stick out too much. They become a distraction. So if I were to get here and get in our dev tools here, select this and get rid of the box shadow here and here, it just looks so much better when it's left clean like this. All right, number 10. Now, number 10, I don't have a slide for. This is just going to be something people do on their portfolios, and it's usually from young people, telling us your age. If you're really young, you're like a 16-year-old UI designer or front-end developer or back-end, whatever, I would leave your age out. And this is something I did for some reason. I was looking back at my portfolios back when I was a teenager, and for some reason, one of the first things I told people was my age. Well, I was proud of it because I'm doing all this cool stuff as a teenager. But if your goal is to get hired, people who want to hire you, they don't want to hire a teenager, Now, am I saying outright lie? No. If they ask you your age, tell them. But I would not put that out there front and center saying that, hey, I'm a 15-year-old UI designer, hire me. That's going to work against you. All right. So number 11. All right. Design better layouts if you have limited content. So in this case, we have an excessive amount of white space. And what you need to do is either one of two things. Take your type right here and really increase the size so that you can fill out the layout more or add more content. This right here still seems like an empty void. That kind of makes sense because it's like a space theme, but still, you don't want to have this amount of white space, especially on the large desktop resolution. It makes it feel just incomplete. All right, so next one is number 12. Designing tiny customized scroll bars. All right, so this right here, this customized scroll bar, if I come over here and try to click it, and I try to do it quickly, I'm not having I'm not having good success. If I come over here and I have to sit there, and it's like a painful process. If you're going to customize the scroll bar, make sure you make it at least the width of the default scroll bar that browsers like Chrome and Firefox give you. That way, people don't have to sit there screwing around trying to find this. Not everybody has a scroll wheel that functions, so you have to take that into account. All right, next up, number 13, and that is putting too many links in your primary navigation. Up here, we have a lot of links, all right? We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So generally speaking, you don't want any more than 5 links in your primary navigation. After that, you need to either create a secondary navigation or a drop-down or relegate the other links into your footer or other areas of the user interface. This right here is just a little bit too much, and it becomes a little bit overwhelming for people, especially to scan for quick items that they may want to access. So limit those, I would say, to no more than 5. And finally, giving no direction. So we're going back to this one. You're not really giving me a clearly defined call to action. There is a tiny little bouncy down arrow indicating that people should scroll, but that is not enough in and of itself. So if you're going to use a scroll indicator, make sure it's bigger and it's obvious. In most cases, you're going to want to use a button as well as a strong primary call to action, and even include a secondary call to action that's styled differently. All right, so that is my very quick list. All right, everybody, hopefully you enjoyed that. Of course, there's probably many other things that you shouldn't do as a UI designer. If you enjoyed this, let me know. Make sure to subscribe, and I'll see you all soon. Goodbye.